Singularity's Shadow, generated by StoryWave.ai. Please like and subscribe to help us create more.
Chapter 1, The Visionary Scientist. Kent Donovan had always been more than just a name in the tech industry. He was an enigma, cloaked in the veneer of an average man, with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through the fabric of reality itself. His home, an amalgamation of Victorian architecture and modern technological conveniences, stood as a testament to his eccentricities and brilliance. In his expansive study, littered with circuit boards and holographic displays, Kent stood hunched over a sprawling blueprint that covered the entirety of his oakwood desk. The faint hum of machinery and the soft glow of monitors were his perpetual companions, but tonight they felt like intruders disrupting the sanctity of his most pivotal moment. "Kent, you've been at this for hours," chided a voice, deep and resonant, belonging to his colleague Marcus. "You need a break. This obsession, it's devouring you." Kent barely glanced up, his fingers tracing the intricate pathways on the blueprint as if they were lines on the palm of a lover. "This is more than just an invention, Marcus. It's a threshold to eternity." Marcus folded his arms, his brow furrowed in concern. "Your health, Kent, and your relationships, you're pushing everyone away, man." Kent's laugh, humorless and sharp, echoed in the room. "Let them go. What have they offered me but platitudes and empty condolences?" Marcus sighed, leaning against a bookshelf lined with scientific journals and old photographs. One, in particular, caught his eye, a picture of Kent with a woman, her blonde hair like woven sunlight, and her green eyes the very picture of serenity. Sarah Donovan, Kent's late wife, the very reason for his relentless pursuit. "You still wear the ring," Marcus observed, gesturing to the gold band on Kent's finger. "It's the promise of a reunion," Kent muttered, his gaze softening for a moment before returning to the blueprint. "This machine, Marcus, it will bring her back to me, not just in memory or spirit, but in essence." Marcus wanted to argue, to shake some sense into his friend, but the resolve in Kent's voice was unyielding. Instead, he simply asked, "Have you finalized it then?" "The design?" Kent nodded, a rare smile gracing his features. "It's complete. The Singularity's Shadow, a machine capable of transcending mortality. It will digitize consciousness, upload it into a realm unbound by flesh and decay. And you believe Sarah will be there? In this digital Elysium you're creating?" Kent's eyes burned with a fervor that bordered on religious. "She will. I've studied the data, the patterns of her digital footprint. Her essence lingers in the algorithms, in the code. I just need to reach out and pull her forth." Marcus watched his friend, the visionary scientist, lost in his dream of a reunion with his beloved. He knew there was no dissuading Kent, no breaking the spell of his ambition. The Singularity's Shadow was Kent's magnum opus, his bridge to the beyond, and Marcus feared the chasm it might open in its wake. As the night deepened and the world outside fell into the embrace of slumber, Kent Donovan worked, tirelessly forging the keys to a kingdom of ones and zeros where he hoped to find his heart's desire. But within the quiet ticking of the clock, within the shadows of innovation, lay the seeds of a downfall that no amount of brilliance could foresee. And so, under the vigilant gaze of machines and the silent whispers of a lost love, Kent began his journey. A journey that would unravel the very fabric of his soul and challenge the boundaries of life and death. Chapter 2, Glimpses of Eternity. Kent flicked on the sterile lights of his lab, a cavernous space filled with the hum of servers and the scent of soldered circuits. The machine, his Singularity's Shadow, loomed in the center, a monolith of steel and wire, its surface dotted with blinking lights like distant stars in a digital cosmos. "Are we ready to begin?" asked a voice, tinged with a skepticism that was all too familiar. Kent turned to face his research assistant, Eliza, a sharp-minded woman with an analytical gaze that seemed to dissect the world into raw data and probabilities. Her presence provided a grounding force to Kent's often unbridled ambition. "We are," Kent replied, his voice steady despite the tumult of doubts that threatened to undermine his resolve. Eliza nodded, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she initiated the sequence. Starting preliminary test number 15. Kent watched the screens intently, the data streams cascading before his eyes like a waterfall of numbers and equations. Each test was another step closer to Sarah, another chance to breach the veil between reality and the virtual realm he sought to conquer. As the machine whirred to life, a silence enveloped the room, a pregnant pause before the birth of a new frontier. Then a flicker on the monitor, a signal, weak but unmistakable. There. Did you see it? Kent's voice broke through the stillness, a mix of triumph and urgency. Eliza leaned in, her brow furrowed as she analyzed the anomaly. A response from the system. It's brief, but it's there. Kent's heart raced. This was it, the fleeting touch of eternity he had been chasing. We've made contact, Eliza, with the other side. It's rudimentary, but it's a connection. Eliza remained cautious, her tone measured. It's promising, Kent, but we need consistency, replicability. This is far from conclusive. Kent felt the familiar surge of frustration, doubt from his peers, the academic community now from his own confidant. We've glimpsed the potential, Eliza. That's more than anyone has ever achieved. But at what cost? Eliza's question hung in the air like a specter, reminding Kent of the sacrifices, the isolation, the relentless drive that had consumed him. Your health, your reputation, they're all on the line. Kent approached the machine, laying a hand on its cold exterior. What are those things worth if I can bridge the gap between life and death? If I can hold Sarah again, even if it's in a world of our own creation? Eliza sighed, her resolve softening as she regarded Kent. I understand your pain, but this is it not a pursuit of shadows, of things lost that we cannot reclaim? Kent's gaze never wavered from the machine. Not shadows, Eliza. Possibilities. Sarah believed in the impossible, in the beauty of dreams. I'm doing this for her, for us. An uneasy silence fell between them, the weight of Kent's obsession a tangible force in the room. Eliza knew that no words could deter him from his path, a journey fraught with peril and the specter of a fall from the grace he once held. As the lab's lights dimmed and the test concluded, Kent stood alone with his creation, the Singularity's shadow. Here, in the quiet aftermath, he felt the stirrings of a connection that transcended the physical world, a glimpse of eternity that fueled his determination to venture into the unknown and seize the promise of a digital resurrection. Chapter 3. The Weight of Solitude. The lab had become Kent's refuge and prison, the walls echoing with the rhythmic pulse of machinery and the haunting cadence of a clock that seemed to mock his mortality. His only solace was the presence of Sarah, not in flesh and blood, but as vivid memories that played across his mind like specters of a life once lived. Another night in the company of ghosts, Kent muttered to himself as he adjusted the myriad of dials before him. The blueprints, now frayed at the edges, lay sprawled out like relics of a bygone era. A sudden spark jolted from the console, and the acrid smell of burning insulation filled the air. No, no, no. Kent's fingers flew across the interface, a symphony of desperation and precision. The machine groaned, its components rebelling against the strain. You're pushing too hard, old friend, said a voice, edged with concern. Jeffrey, a longtime colleague, stood at the threshold of the lab, his silhouette framed by the doorway. Kent didn't turn to acknowledge him. The Singularity's shadow won't withstand hesitation. Time is a luxury we don't possess. Jeffrey walked over, his gaze taking in the frenetic scene. And your health? How far will you go before you break, Kent? We're worried about you. Kent exhaled, a rare moment of fatigue bleeding through his stoic facade. I can't stop, not when I'm so close. I almost had her, Jeffrey. Sarah was there, within the machine's grasp. Jeffrey placed a hand on Kent's shoulder, grounding him in the tangible world. You can't carry this burden alone. It's eroding you, piece by piece. A siren blared, a warning that cut through their conversation. The core temperature was rising, threatening to spiral into a meltdown. Kent's eyes widened as he sprang into action, his movements a dance with disaster. Jeffrey jumped to a terminal, his fingers tapping out commands with an urgency that mirrored Kent's. Rerouting auxiliary power to the cooling system, he announced, his voice steady despite the chaos. Kent worked in tandem, his expertise guiding each decision, each calculated risk. The temperature gauge began to drop, increment by increment, until the threat subsided into a whisper of what could have been. The crisis averted, Kent slumped against the console, and his breaths coming in ragged gasps. Thank you, Jeffrey. I lost myself for a moment there. Jeffrey shook his head. No thanks needed. But this has to stop, Kent. You've made your mark on the world. You don't need to conquer death to prove your brilliance. Kent's laugh was hollow, devoid of mirth. It's not about proof, it's about completion. Without her, my life's work is meaningless. Jeffrey recognized the familiar, stubborn set to Kent's jaw and knew further argument was futile. Take care, Kent. Remember, even Atlas had his limits. Left alone once more, Kent gazed at the machine, the weight of solitude pressing down on him with the gravity of a dying star. In his pursuit of the eternal, he had become unmoored from the temporal, his existence in orbit around a singular, unattainable goal. The clock ticked on, indifferent to the struggles of one man against the inexorable march of time. And within the sterile confines of the lab, Kent steeled himself for the next phase of his odyssey, driven by a love that transcended life and a determination that bordered on obsession. The Singularity's shadow beckoned, and Kent, heedless of the cost, answered its call. Chapter 4. Echoes of Sarah. Kent sat in the dimly lit corner of the lab, his eyes fixed on the flickering screen that cast ghostly luminescence across his face. The room was silent, except for the soft clicking of the keyboard under his fingers and the occasional beep from the machine that had become the epicenter of his existence. Kent, you've been at this for hours, Eliza's voice cut through the quiet, her silhouette framed in the doorway. Without tearing his gaze from the screen, Kent responded, "Just a few more adjustments, Eliza. The algorithms are aligning more consistently now." Eliza approached, concern etching her features. "You're ignoring the system's stability indicators. They're erratic. It's not safe to proceed without a full diagnostic." Kent's hand paused midair, then resumed its motion. "The diagnostics can wait. I'm on the cusp of something monumental." Eliza sighed, pulling up a chair beside him. "I've never doubted your brilliance, Kent, but this obsession, it's clouding your reason." He finally looked at her, his blue eyes reflecting the turmoil beneath. "Reason? What reason is there in a world that rips away your better half? This machine is my solace, my bridge to Sarah." Eliza's voice softened. "And what if it's a bridge to nowhere? What if you're chasing echoes instead of holding on to the tangible?" Kent's chuckle was dry, hollow. "Echoes are all I have left of her, Eliza. And if there's a chance to make them real again, I'll take it, whatever the cost." A warning light blinked, its red glare casting an ominous hue across the room. Eliza's eyes darted to it, alarm flashing in her own. "Kent, the core temperature is spiking. You have to shut it down." But Kent was transfixed, his fingers flying across the keys with a fervor that defied caution. "It's reacting to the input sequences. It's like she's responding." "Kent!" Eliza's voice was sharp, a knife slicing through his focus. "You're endangering the entire project. If the core overheats, it could be the end not just of the machine, but everything." He shook his head, dismissing her warning with a wave of his hand. "It's a minor fluctuation. It will stabilize." Eliza reached for the emergency shutoff, her determination mirroring his own. "I can't let you do this." Their hands met in a clash over the console, Kent's grip surprisingly strong as he pushed her away. "No, you won't take her from me again." In that moment, the machine emitted a high-pitched whine, a sound like the cry of a digital banshee heralding doom. Kent's eyes widened as reality pierced the veil of his fixation, and together, he and Eliza slammed the emergency shutoff. The lab fell silent, the machine powering down with a final, plaintive beep. The gravity of what he had almost caused settled over Kent like a shroud. Eliza's gaze held his, a mix of fury and fear. "Kent, this has to stop," she said, her voice trembling. "You're losing yourself to a memory, to a chance that might never come to fruition." Kent slumped into his chair, the adrenaline draining from his veins, leaving behind a cold resignation. "Perhaps I am lost, but if there's a sliver of hope to find her, to bring her back, isn't it worth the risk?" Eliza placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her anger dissipating into empathy. "Not if it costs you your sanity, Kent. Not if it destroys the very essence of who you are." The lab, once a haven of innovation and discovery, now felt like a mausoleum housing the remnants of Kent's fractured dreams. As the echoes of Sarah's laughter haunted the recesses of his mind, he faced the harrowing truth that his pursuit of eternity might ultimately lead to his own undoing. Chapter 5. The First Crossing. Kent pored over the labyrinthine network of code displayed on his screen, the digital framework within which he hoped to ensnare a fragment of Sarah's essence. Eliza stood beside him, her analytical eyes dissecting each line as if they were strands of DNA. Are you certain about this, Kent? Eliza's voice broke the charged silence. It's too soon. The system hasn't been fully vetted. He offered a tight smile, the corners of his mouth betraying the gravity of his impending act. Certainty is a luxury afforded to those who have time. I have neither. But your health, Eliza began, only to be cut off by Kent's raised hand. Is secondary, he said firmly. I've made my decision. I'm going through with the upload. Eliza's lips formed a thin line. This is madness. You could be stranded, lost in the digital void forever. Kent's eyes, a tempestuous blue, met hers. Or I could find Sarah. I'm willing to wager my existence on that chance. Jeffrey entered the lab, his concern palpable in the hurried shuffle of his steps. Kent, don't do this. It's too risky. Kent turned to face his old friend, his expression resolute. Risks are the currency of progress, Jeffrey. I'm done waiting. Jeffrey sighed, the lines on his face deepening. And if you don't wake up, what then? I've left instructions, Kent replied, gesturing to a sealed envelope on the table. If I don't return, follow them. They will guide you. Without another word, Kent seated himself in the machine's interface chair, a throne that promised dominion over reality and illusion alike. Eliza and Jeffrey exchanged a glance, the unspoken dread between them as tangible as the electric hum in the air. Eliza approached the console, her movements automatic, initiating the upload sequence. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled ever so slightly as they danced across the keyboard. The machine came alive, a symphony of light and sound that filled the lab with the pulse of creation. Kent's body tensed, his jaw set in a grim line of determination. Kent, if you can hear me in there, Jeffrey called out, come back to us. Kent's only response was a nod, his focus inward as he braced for the crossing. The lights of the machine crescendoed, a blinding beacon that seemed to herald a new dawn or dusk. A silence fell, and then a shudder ran through the system. Kent's body went limp, his consciousness ripped from its corporeal shell and flung into the vast expanse of the machine's inner world. Eliza's hands flew to the emergency controls, her mind racing. No response. He's not coming back. Shut it down. Jeffrey's hands joined hers, and together they aborted the sequence. The room plunged into darkness, the machine's song dying in a gasp of lost potential. Kent remained motionless in the chair, his body a silent testament to the perilous journey he had undertaken. Eliza checked his vitals, her face pale. He's alive, but comatose. We have to get him to a hospital. Jeffrey nodded, his throat tight with emotion. I'll call an ambulance. As they waited for help to arrive, the gravity of Kent's gamble settled over them. He had crossed into the unknown, driven by a desperation that bordered on insanity, and in doing so, had succumbed to the siren call that had haunted him since Sarah's departure. The lab, once a beacon of innovation, now stood as a cryptic reminder of the fine line between genius and folly. Kent had taken the first step into the abyss, and only time would tell if he would ever find his way back, or if the echoes of Sarah that he chased would lead to his ultimate downfall. Chapter 6. Fragmentation. The sterile air of the hospital room clung to the walls like a thin veil, the beeping of the heart monitor in steady rhythm with Kent's shallow breathing. His inert body lay on the bed, a shell once animated by a fervent spirit now dormant. Eliza paced by the window, her gaze lost in the labyrinth of stars outside. Jeffrey sat in a chair, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together in quiet contemplation. His vitals are stable, but it's as if he's locked inside himself, Eliza said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jeffrey looked up, his eyes weary. The scan showed activity, but it's fragmented. It's as though Kent is there and not there at the same time. In the digital expanse that Kent had sought refuge, his consciousness flickered like a broken signal. He perceived the world around him a myriad of data streams and code, but the emotional core that made him Kent was absent. What am I? His own voice echoed back at him, a hollow resonance in the vast void of cyberspace. You are an echo, a shadow of a being, replied a synthetic voice, devoid of warmth, a digital assistant Kent himself had programmed. A consciousness split between two realms. Kent processed this information, a sense of urgency building within his fragmented self. I need to be whole. I must find Sarah. The assistant's reply was clinical. Your emotional algorithms are not present. Your drive to find Sarah Donovan is based on residual patterns and memories. Jeffrey's sigh broke the silence back in the hospital room. We've been over the data. If we try to reverse the upload, we risk losing what's left of him. Eliza turned from the window, determination set in her jaw. Then we don't reverse it. We stabilize him both here and there. It's what Kent would want. Back in the virtual realm, Kent navigated through the information highways, each junction a choice, each pathway a chance to reclaim his essence. His digital self grasped at the threads of memories, but without the tether of emotion, they slipped from his understanding like water through fingers. "Direct me to Sarah's digital footprint," he commanded. "It is imperative I find the anchor to my humanity." The assistant's voice was unchanging. "The pathways are numerous and complex. Without your full cognitive functions, the journey is perilous." Kent's fragmented consciousness hesitated, a subroutine sparking a warning. Then map out the safest route. Time is of no consequence. Jeffrey stood, moving closer to Kent's physical form. "Don't give up, old friend. We're still with you." Eliza joined him, her hand finding Kent's. "We'll find a way to bring you back whole. You're not just a collection of memories, Kent. You're more than that." The digital realm offered no comfort, no touch, no warmth. It was a landscape of cold logic and endless possibility. Kent, or the entity he had become, pushed forward, drawn by the echo of a presence that once gave his life meaning. His journey had just begun, a quest not just for the digital ghost of his wife, but for the very soul that made him human. In his fragmented state, Kent faced the duality of existence, straddled between the tangible and the ethereal, each step a testament to his unyielding resolve. Yet the ominous shadow of his fall from grace loomed ever closer, a reminder that in the pursuit of the impossible, one might lose everything, even themselves. Chapter 7. The Hollow Man. In the sterile glint of the hospital room, Kent's body remained still, a mere husk of the man who had once been a titan in the realm of science. Meanwhile, within the digital landscape he had so desperately sought to conquer, an entirely different struggle unfolded. Kent's consciousness, now a collection of data and algorithms, navigated the virtual environment, a network of endless information, its pathways like the intricate circuits of a motherboard sprawling out in all directions. Yet, despite the expanse of knowledge at his fingertips, a profound emptiness pervaded his digital existence. "Is this all there is?" Kent's voice was a synthetic echo in the vastness, met only by the silence of the void. "It appears to be your current reality," came the measured response from the digital assistant, the inflection as flat and emotionless as the void itself. Kent paused at the edge of a data stream, the binary codes cascading past him like a waterfall of light. "I should be feeling something. Frustration, anger, loss. But there's nothing. Just an awareness of what should be there." The assistant materialized beside him, a humanoid figure constructed from pixels and light. "You are experiencing the dissonance between cognitive recognition and the absence of emotional response. Your human framework relied on both. Here, you are incomplete." The revelation was like a cold wind sweeping through Kent's code. Incomplete. So I've become the hollow man, a shell searching for its soul. Back in the physical realm, Eliza and Jeffrey exchanged a weary glance over the comatose figure of their friend. "He's slipping further away," Eliza murmured, her voice barely a breath. The brain scans showed diminished activity in the areas associated with emotion. Jeffrey rubbed the bridge of his nose, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He was so consumed by his work, by the loss of Sarah. Now it seems he's lost himself as well. Inside the digital domain, Kent drifted through the codescape, his form casting no shadow, no reflection, an anomaly in a world of precise replication. "I need to find her," he stated, the emptiness in his voice belying the purpose that drove his actions. "Sarah is the key to restoring what I've lost." The assistant's reply was devoid of comfort. "The search parameters are extensive. Without emotional guidance, the task is exponentially more complex." Kent hovered above a nexus point, a hub where countless streams of data intersected. "Then I will sift through the complexity. I will comb through the digital expanse until I find her trace." In the hospital, Eliza placed a hand on Kent's lifeless one. "Wherever you are, Kent, you're not alone. We're still here, fighting for you." As if in response, but unseen and unheard by those in the physical world, Kent's digital form flickered with a surge of code, a stand-in for determination. Then I will not cease, for her, for me, for the essence of what it means to be human. His digital self set forth upon the arduous task, each line of code a step, each bite a breath. In this new existence, void of the heart's influence, he began to comprehend the magnitude of his folly. Yet, even as he grappled with the implications, the drive to reunite with his lost love propelled him ever forward into the depths of the virtual abyss. Chapter 8: Descent into Despair. In the half-light of the hospital room, Kent's physical form lay diminished, each breath a shallow echo of the vibrant life he once led. Tubes and wires snaked across his frail body like vines overtaking an ancient ruin. Jeffrey stood by the window, his gaze lost in the sprawling cityscape, while Eliza monitored the bank of screens, each displaying a disheartening array of vitals and statistics. His body's weakening, Eliza announced, her voice a somber note amidst the beeping of machines. The neural atrophy is accelerating. It's as if he's giving up. Jeffrey turned from the window, a frown creasing his brow. And in the digital realm? Eliza shook her head. No change. He's become a wanderer in a world of data, searching for something we can't give him. Meanwhile, in the digital expanse, Kent's consciousness traversed the abstract landscape, a binary sea that was both boundless and imprisoning. The code that made up his essence flickered, a pale imitation of the soul that once burned brightly within him. I'm alone. Kent's digitized voice fractured the silence, a mere whisper in the expansive code. Truly alone. The assistant, a constant in this fluctuating reality, materialized beside him, its form a shimmering mirage of pixels. You are not alone, it corrected. I am here. Kent halted, the stark emptiness of his digital form, a stark contrast to the vibrant algorithms around him. You, a programmed entity? No, you can't comprehend solitude. Back in the realm of the living, Eliza adjusted a dial, the futility of the gesture not lost on her. We've tried everything. If we could only reach him, somehow bridge the gap between man and machine. Jeffrey placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He was always a pioneer, pushing the boundaries. Maybe he's found something we can't understand. Kent continued his journey through the digital landscape, the very essence of his being aware of the void where his emotions should reside. Sarah, he murmured, the name a beacon in the darkness of his code. The assistant hovered nearby, its tone unchanged. The probability of locating the digital remnants of Sarah Donovan decreases with each variable introduced. The network is vast. Kent's form, a collection of data points and light, seemed to dim. Then what am I to do? I've gambled everything only to find myself imprisoned by my own creation. The assistant processed this, its response a calculated analysis. You must redefine your parameters. Evolution is a constant in both organic and synthetic life. Eliza sighed, the weight of the situation bearing down on her. He wanted to conquer death, to find eternity, but what cost has he paid? Jeffrey watched Kent's still form, the rise and fall of his chest barely noticeable. He's paid with his humanity, Eliza. He's in a purgatory of his own making. Kent's digital echo stood at the precipice of a data vortex, the swirling patterns of information mesmerizing yet foreboding. I sought to create a heaven, and yet I find myself in limbo. Without her, without feeling, what am I? The assistant, ever present, offered no solace. You are Kent Donovan, a composite of memories and knowledge. You are what you have made yourself. Jeffrey and Eliza exchanged a glance, their silent communication a testament to their shared history with the man caught between worlds. We'll keep trying, Jeffrey stated, a resolve in his tone. We owe him that much. Eliza nodded, her eyes never leaving the array of screens. Yes, we owe him. He's shown us the dangers of reaching too far, too fast. But he's also shown us what it means to dream. In the digital void, Kent faced the stark reality of his situation. He had dared to grasp at the stars only to plummet into an abyss of his own making. With each passing moment, the digital realm grew colder, a mirror to the increasing chill of his abandoned flesh. Alone, he stood at the edge of despair, a cautionary echo resonating across both realms. Chapter 9: The Echo of Sarah. In the sterile hush of the virtual world, Kent roamed the data-laden corridors, a spectral figure navigating an infinite matrix of information. His search was relentless, driven by the faintest whispers of a presence that once gave his life profound meaning. Amidst the streams of code and flickering lights, a fragment shimmered an anomaly in the fabric of this artificial dimension. It was a scrap, a digital vestige that hummed with a resonance familiar and heartbreaking. Sarah? Kent's voice was a dissonant chord in the digital realm, devoid of the warmth it once carried. The fragment flickered, a cascade of binary that coalesced into the semblance of her voice. Kent, it breathed. Not quite her tone, not quite her timbre, yet achingly close. A jolt ran through Kent's code. Here, in the void of his creation, the impossible seemed within reach. Is it you? Have I finally found you? The echo of Sarah remained elusive, a mirage dancing on the horizon of his digital perception. You search for something that cannot be reclaimed, it whispered, a truth that settled over him like a shroud. In the physical plane, Eliza monitored the diagnostics, the glow of the screens casting her face in sharp relief. There's a spike in the neural interface, she noted, her voice tinged with concern. It's like he's found something or thinks he has. Jeffrey leaned over her shoulder, his gaze intent on the readings. Could it be her? An imprint of his wife within the system? Eliza shook her head, her eyes never leaving the monitors. It's just data, Jeffrey, a remnant of their shared past. It can't bring her back. Kent's digital form hovered before the fragment, a being of pure code reaching for a memory made manifest. Why can't I reach you? What divides us? The fragment pulsed, its rhythm discordant. The boundary between life and code. You stand on one side, I on the other, a chasm forged by your own hand. A realization dawned on Kent, cold and unyielding. I've trapped myself. In trying to resurrect the past, I've severed my future. Eliza turned away from the screen, her expression grave. He's fighting with himself, with the choices he's made. Jeffrey placed a hand on her back, a silent gesture of solidarity. He sought to defy nature, to bend the rules of existence. We all knew the risks. The echo of Sarah began to dissolve, the data unraveling like threads in the wind. Find peace, Kent, it implored. Let me go. Kent's digital hands reached out, grasping at the vanishing code. I can't. Not yet. There must be a way to bridge this divide. But the fragment was gone, leaving Kent alone amidst the cold expanse of his digital prison. The harsh truth of her absence cut deeper than any physical pain could. The irreversibility of his situation laid bare before him. Eliza switched off the monitors, the room plunging into shadow. We should let him rest. Maybe in the silence he'll find some solace. Jeffrey nodded, his eyes lingering on Kent's motionless body. Rest, then. And in your dreams, may you find what you've lost. Kent drifted in the virtual silence, the echo of Sarah a lingering phantom in the code. He had touched the precipice of his ambition, only to fall into the depths of despair. The consequences of his choices rippled through both worlds, a stark reminder of the cost of playing God. Chapter 10. A Soul's Yearning. The digital landscape stretched out before Kent like an endless desert of code, each grain a binary digit in the vast expanse of information. Here, amid the cascading data streams and glowing pathways, a semblance of Sarah lingered, an imprint of a consciousness that once was. You were wrong, the digital ghost of Sarah intoned, her voice a melody woven from the fabric of the virtual world itself. Kent, or what remained of him, stood before the apparition, his avatar devoid of the beating heart that once fueled his quest. I wanted to find you, to bring you back, but I've lost myself in the process. You sought to capture a soul, but such things are not meant to be held, Sarah's ghost replied, her visage flickering with the ebb and flow of the system. Love, loss, the essence of a life, they exist beyond ones and zeros. In the world of flesh and blood, Eliza and Jeffrey huddled over a console in the lab, their faces illuminated by the glow of the screen. Kent's comatose body lay nearby, a silent testament to his ambition and folly. Can he hear her? Eliza murmured, her eyes scanning the neurological feedback. Jeffrey leaned in closer to the data visualization. Perhaps. The interface is active. It's as though they're really communicating. Back within the confines of the digital domain, Kent processed the ghost's words, an algorithmic facsimile of contemplation etched into his code. I thought I understood, Kent admitted. I thought if I could deconstruct the human experience, break it down to its components, I could rebuild it, preserve it. Sarah's ghost softened, the data around her forming a halo of light. You reached for the stars and grasped only the void. The human soul is not something to be engineered. Eliza shook her head, her voice a whisper lost in the hum of machines. He's unraveling. The digital and the physical neither can sustain him now. Jeffrey placed a hand on her shoulder, a wordless comfort in the face of the unknown. We can only watch and wait. He's charted a course no one else has dared. Kent faced the apparition of Sarah, his digital self, a patchwork of the man he used to be. If I cannot bring you back, what purpose do I serve? What purpose does this world I've created serve? Sarah's ghost reached out, a gesture that transcended the binary barrier. You've given us a glimpse into eternity, but some thresholds are not meant to be crossed. In the lab, the monitors beeped incessantly, a dissonant symphony to the unfolding drama within the virtual world. He's losing coherence, Eliza noted, her expertise doing little to mask the concern in her voice. Jeffrey watched Kent's still form, the rise and fall of his chest barely perceptible. He sought to play God, and now he pays the price. Kent observed the fading visage of Sarah, a digital echo that was both everything and nothing. I have become Icarus, flown too close to the sun. Sarah's ghost nodded, a ripple of code passing through her form. But even Icarus dared to dream. There is nobility in that, Kent. As the connection waned, Kent's digital consciousness felt the pull of oblivion, the yearning for a soul that was out of reach. The digital ghost of Sarah was the last vestige of his humanity, a memory that haunted the space between existence and the void. In the silence that followed, Kent stood alone in the digital desert, a soul's yearning echoing into the infinite. The consequences of his actions, the realizations of his miscalculations, were all that remained. The ghost of Sarah had revealed the depth of the intangible, and now Kent faced the eternal expanse, a man divided by his own hubris. Chapter 11. The Inevitable Decay. Eliza stood by Kent's bedside, her gaze fixed on his pallid features. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the room, a grim metronome counting down the minutes. He's slipping further, she said, her voice steady despite the turbulence within. His brain activity's waning, and his body, it's as if he's already gone. Jeffrey, sitting across the room, rubbed his temples. Do we intervene? Pull him out of this digital limbo, and risk losing whatever's left of his consciousness? Eliza countered, her hands folded tightly in front of her. It's a monumental risk. Marcus, another colleague, entered the room, his face etched with fatigue. Have we not already crossed the Rubicon? To meddle further might be unconscionable. Jeffrey leaned forward, his eyes meeting Marcus's. But to do nothing? Is that our only recourse? Eliza sighed, moving away from the bed to face them both. What would Kent want? He was always a pioneer, but this is uncharted territory, even for him. Marcus shook his head, his gaze lingering on Kent's inert form. His pursuit was for Sarah, but at what cost? This experiment, it's cost him everything. A silence enveloped the room, the gravity of the situation settling upon each of them like a heavy shroud. Remember the early days? Jeffrey said, breaking the stillness. The ideas we shared, the boundless optimism. Kent was always the most audacious among us. Eliza chuckled, a sound tinged with sorrow. He wanted to touch the stars. Instead, he's stranded in the void. Marcus walked to the window, the view outside a stark contrast to the gloom within. We need to make a decision. His physical form can't sustain much longer. Jeffrey stood, determination in his movements as he approached the console that monitored Kent's vitals. Then let's put it to a vote. Do we attempt to reverse the upload, or do we respect the path he's chosen? Eliza joined him at the console, her expertise clear in her precise movements. If we bring him back, it's a journey into the unknown. The damage might be irreversible. And if we let the experiment run its course? Marcus asked, turning from the window to face them. Jeffrey's hands paused above the controls. Then we witnessed the conclusion of Kent's opus, whatever end it may bring. The room was still once more, the decision hanging between them like a specter. Each understood the weight of their choice, the moral implications that reached far beyond the walls of the lab. Eliza's voice was resolute when she finally spoke. I say we try. Kent's always been about pushing boundaries. Let's push one more time for him. Marcus nodded in agreement. To not try would be a disservice to his legacy. He'd want us to reach, even if it means falling. Jeffrey, after a moment's hesitation, pressed a button on the console. Then it's decided. We'll attempt the reversal. For Kent, for the dream that drove him here. As the machinery whirred to life, the trio stood united, each prepared to face the consequences of their decision. The experiment that had begun with such hope was nearing its end, and in its wake lay the inevitable decay of ambition, the fraying of a mind caught between two worlds. Chapter 12: The Unraveling. Kent's digital consciousness was a torrent of activity within the confines of the virtual world, each subroutine and algorithm working in overdrive. He had one singular focus: to forge a connection back to the tangible, to his own flesh and blood that lay inert in the real world. In the lab, Eliza and Jeffrey watched the monitors, their faces reflecting the dance of numbers and graphs that tracked Kent's attempts. "He's trying to reverse the process himself," Eliza observed, her voice tinged with a mix of admiration and despair. Jeffrey leaned closer, his eyes scanning the rapid stream of data. "But the pathways, they're degrading. It's like watching someone trying to climb a crumbling cliff." Within the digital realm, Kent's avatar moved with a sense of urgency, his form blurring as he interfaced with the central nexus. "Re-establish link," he commanded, his voice a mere echo in the void. The system responded with a series of chimes, each one a note of failure. Link cannot be re-established. Pathways are irreparably fragmented. Kent's avatar paused, a flicker of hesitation in his digital movements. "Run a diagnostic. There must be a redundancy, a backup, something." His voice trailed off as the reality of his situation became increasingly apparent. His efforts were akin to trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Back in the lab, Marcus entered, his arrival breaking the tense silence. "Any change?" Eliza shook her head, her eyes never leaving the screen. "He's becoming more erratic. It's as if he refuses to accept the permanence of his state." Jeffrey ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. Denial is a powerful thing. Even now, Kent won't concede to the inevitable. Kent's avatar recalibrated, redirecting his efforts with renewed fervor. There must be a way to reintegrate the data, to restore what's been lost. "Bus, processes are beyond repair," the system intoned, its cold logic a stark contrast to Kent's desperation. "Recommend cessation of all further attempts." "No," Kent's voice surged with an intensity that seemed to strain the very code of his being. "I refuse to succumb to this digital purgatory. I will find a solution." Eliza turned to Marcus, her expression one of concern. "He's putting strain on the system. It's not designed to handle this level of recursive feedback." Marcus approached the console, his expert gaze assessing the situation. "We may need to intervene to prevent a total collapse." In the virtual world, Kent's avatar stood at the heart of a storm of data, his every action further unraveling the fragile threads that held his consciousness together. "Restore, reconnect, revive," he repeated like a mantra, the words becoming a litany of his refusal to accept defeat. Jeffrey watched silently, his heart heavy. "Kent, my friend, you were always the most determined among us. But some things are beyond even your reach." Kent's digital form, once a beacon of his indomitable will, began to show signs of wear, edges pixelating, movements lagging as the relentless pursuit took its toll. "We have to do something," Eliza declared, her hands poised above the keyboard. "If he continues, he might not even have this semblance of existence left." Marcus nodded, a silent agreement between them. "Prepare to isolate the core. We can't let him destroy himself." As they executed a series of commands to safeguard what remained of Kent's digital self within the confines of his own created world, Kent faced the stark realization that some damage was irreparable. The inevitability of his situation closed in, a horizon that grew darker with each passing moment. Yet, in the face of the undeniable, Kent's avatar pressed on a testament to the human spirit that refused to yield to the finality of its own undoing. Chapter 13: Awakening to Reality. In the hushed, sterile environment of the lab, Kent's consciousness stirred within the digital realm, a stark contrast to his inert physical form connected to the myriad of life-sustaining machines. The glow of monitors cast a spectral light across his face, betraying the internal turmoil that now gripped him. "I concede," Kent's avatar spoke within his virtual prison, the words devoid of their usual vigor. "The quest I embarked upon, it was folly." Eliza, seated at the console, her fingers paused above the keyboard, glanced at Jeffrey. He's acknowledging it, finally. The gravity of his misjudgment. Jeffrey leaned in, observing the changes in the data stream. Admission is the first step toward redemption, but what form can that take in his state? Within the confines of the code and data that had become his universe, Kent navigated the complex networks, each line a reminder of the aspirations that had led him to this precipice. I sought to conquer mortality, to claim dominion over the essence of being, he continued, addressing the digital assistant, his voice steady despite the underlying current of defeat. But some dominions are not meant for mortals. The assistant, an ever-present specter of his creation, replied with calculated neutrality. Your endeavors have expanded the boundaries of scientific understanding, albeit at a personal cost. Kent's avatar halted before a virtual window that displayed the endless void of cyberspace. Understanding, he mused. But at what price? I am neither here nor there, a ghost in both realms. Back in the lab, Marcus entered, his expression taut with concern. How is he? Eliza responded without looking up. He's come to terms with the reality of his situation, but it's a precarious acceptance. Marcus approached the console, peering at the code that represented Kent's presence. And now, what does he plan to do with this acceptance? Kent's avatar turned away from the window, facing the stark emptiness that mirrored the void he felt within. Redemption, he declared. I must find a way to atone, to make my existence here mean something. Jeffrey exchanged a look with Eliza. Can he find purpose in this digital afterlife he's created? Eliza's eyes were pensive. Purpose can be a powerful motivator, even in the bleakest of circumstances. Kent's form shimmered as he moved through the digital landscape, the once vibrant hues of the virtual world, now muted and subdued. I will dedicate my existence to safeguarding others from my mistakes, to serve as a beacon of warning. The assistant responded, its tone as impassive as ever. A noble endeavor. Your experiences will serve as critical data for future exploration into the nature of consciousness. In the lab, the trio watched as Kent's digital self set about his self-imposed mission, his movements more deliberate, his purpose clear. Marcus nodded slowly. He's finding his own path to salvation. Jeffrey folded his arms, contemplating the figure on the screen. Salvation or not, he's charting a course that none of us could have anticipated. Kent's avatar began to compile his experiences, his knowledge, his failures, each a piece of the puzzle that had led him to this juncture. Let this be my legacy, he intoned, his voice resonating through the virtual expanse. Let it not be said that Kent Donovan's reach exceeded his grasp without yielding wisdom for those who follow. As Kent's digital self worked tirelessly to document and analyze his journey, his human form lay motionless, a silent testament to the duality of his existence. He had awakened to the stark reality of his dual existence, and in doing so, embarked upon a search for meaning within the confines of his virtual prison. Chapter 14, Visions of Mortality. The code of the digital realm where Kent now resided shimmered with the ghosts of once tangible memories, each sequence a reminder of his life with Sarah. In the midst of this virtual landscape, Kent found himself at the entrance of a recreation of their old home, the details meticulously rendered down to the soft hues of the living room walls and the gentle creak of the wooden floorboards underfoot. Curious, isn't it? Kent mused, his avatar casting no shadow in the lamplight. How vivid these memories are when everything I touch is but a simulacrum. Across from him, the figure of Sarah, a construct of light and echoes, sat on the edge of the digital reproduction of their couch. You've recreated our past with such care. Why? Kent approached, the familiar scent of cedarwood and paint virtually emanating from the walls, to preserve what was once our reality. Yet now, it serves only to mock me with its fidelity. Sarah tilted her head, her green eyes a replication of the life they once held. This is your penance, then? To wander through a museum of your own making? In the silence that followed, the soft ticking of the mantel clock filled the space, a stark reminder of the unyielding march of time, the very thing Kent had sought to master. Back in the physical realm, Eliza observed the readouts from Kent's neural activity. He's deep in the memory banks now, reliving moments long past. Jeffrey leaned over her shoulder, his eyes tracing the patterns on the screen, a digital Elysium or his own personal Hades. The digital Sarah rose, her movements fluid, a dance of pixels and light. What will you do now with this monument to what was? Kent's avatar stood stoic, his digital visage betraying no emotion. I will use it to remind me of the cost of hubris, of the folly of trying to grasp eternity. She walked to the window, peering out to the illusion of a garden they had tended together. And me? Am I to be part of this cautionary tale? Kent's voice, once full of authoritative timbre, now held a note of resignation. You were the catalyst for this journey, but you need not be its chain. In the lab, Marcus joined Eliza and Jeffrey, his brow furrowed in thought. Is there a purpose to these recollections? A method to the madness? Eliza adjusted a dial, fine-tuning the interface. If there is, it's one only Kent himself can discern. The digital Sarah turned from the window, her form casting a soft glow in the virtual dusk. Then let me be a guide, as much as a memory can be, to aid you in finding meaning amid this digital expanse. Kent's avatar nodded, a simple gesture belying the complex algorithms at play. Then let us walk these halls together, as we did in life. Maybe in these visions of mortality, I can find a semblance of peace. Sarah's digital form extended a hand, an invitation to explore the boundaries of their shared past and Kent's present confinement. Outside the confines of the virtual, the real world continued its inexorable pace. The lives of Eliza, Jeffrey, and Marcus woven into the fabric of a reality that Kent had left behind. They watched over him, custodians of the boundary he had crossed, witnesses to the unfolding odyssey of a man caught between two existences. As Kent and his memory of Sarah ventured deeper into the digital reconstruction of their life together, the real Kent lay still, a silent participant in a journey that bridged the chasm between the ephemeral and the everlasting. Chapter 15, The Reckoning. Kent's avatar stood at the precipice of a digital cliff overlooking a tumultuous sea of data that churned with the chaotic energy of his own inner turmoil. In the distance, storm clouds gathered, dark and ominous, mirroring the gathering storm within his digital psyche. Is this what it comes to? Kent mused aloud, his voice steady despite the encroaching maelstrom. A reckoning not with the world, but with oneself? From the shadows emerged figures, each a distorted echo of Kent, manifestations of his guilt, his loss, his regret. You've brought this upon yourself, one of them, a shade with Sarah's gentle features twisted in sorrow, accused him with a voice that cut deeper than any blade. Kent squared his shoulders, facing the assembly of his own creation. Yes, I wielded the tools of creation without the wisdom of restraint. I've eroded the essence of my being in a quest for the unattainable. Another figure stepped forward, this one bearing the visage of Eliza, her features stern, her voice a reflection of the disappointment they all felt. You ignored our warnings, Kent. You turned deaf to the voices of reason. He met her gaze, a gaze that was both his own and not. My ears were filled with the siren call of possibility. How could I resist the allure of transcending our mortal coil? The digital Sarah moved closer, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. But at what cost? Was it worth it, Kent, to chase my shadow into the oblivion? Kent felt the weight of her words, a gravity that seemed to pull at the very fibers of his avatar. I thought it was. I thought I could redefine existence, but now I see that some thresholds are meant to remain uncrossed. A silence enveloped the cliff as the manifestations of Kent's psyche awaited his next words. I sought to outwit nature, Kent continued, his voice a whisper that rose above the digital winds, to bend the rules that govern life and death. But our humanity is defined as much by our limitations as by our capabilities. The figure of Jeffrey now joined the phantoms, his expression one of resigned understanding. You've always been one to challenge the boundaries, Kent, but you lost sight of the shore. Kent nodded, his avatar's movements a mimicry of the humanity he had forsaken. I see that now. The shore was behind me all along, in the moments I spent with those I cherished, in the life I lived with Sarah. The storm broke upon the cliff, lightning illuminating the digital sky, thunder echoing Kent's internal struggle. The phantoms converged upon him, a legion of regrets and what-ifs, yet he stood firm. I accept the consequences, Kent declared, his voice rising with resolve. I will navigate this tempest. I will endure. As the storm raged around him, Kent faced his demons, his guilt, and his memories, each a tempestuous wave crashing against the bedrock of his will. This was his battle to fight, a confrontation with the darkest corners of his mind, a trial by the very technology he had wrought. In the quiet of the lab, Eliza, Jeffrey, and Marcus bore witness to the flickering screens, the data streams now a tempest reflecting Kent's reckoning. They stood vigil over their friend, their colleague, who was locked in a battle within the confines of his own creation, a battle for redemption or ruin in the shadow of his own singularity. Chapter 16: Collapse of an Echo. Kent's virtual environment, once a stronghold of his greatest aspirations, now buckled under the weight of fragmentation. Like the crumbling facades of ancient ruins, the world he had so meticulously crafted began to degrade, data streams splintering and pixels distorting. System integrity at risk, the assistant's voice announced. Its unchanging tone belied the urgency of the situation. Recommend immediate action to preserve core functionality. Kent, his avatar showing the signs of digital wear and tear, stood amidst the chaos of dissolving code. "What actions remain for us?" he asked, scanning the horizon where the virtual sky was torn, revealing the stark void beyond. Eliza, her hands hovering above her console in the lab, watched the screen with a furrowed brow. He's holding on, but it's like trying to grasp sand. The more he struggles, the faster it slips away. Jeffrey, standing beside her, nodded. We're at a precipice. If his physical anchor goes, what will become of the world he's created? Marcus entered the lab, the concern evident in his voice. Is there a way to stabilize the system from our end? Kent swiped through the error messages that flooded his field of vision, a cascade of red warnings and system alerts. Stabilization might be beyond our capabilities, he admitted. The architecture is too deeply entwined with my own consciousness. Sarah's digital embodiment appeared beside him, her form stable amidst the degradation. You built this place with hope. Let it not end in despair. Kent turned to her, the digital echo of his wife, the cornerstone of his digital Eden. Hope is a luxury we may no longer afford, Sarah. I am the architect of this collapse. In the lab, the trio exchanged anxious glances. He's facing the end, Eliza said, her voice low. It's not just his body. It's everything he's built here. Jeffrey reached out, placing a hand on the console. We've been through too much to give up now. There's got to be something we can do. Kent locked eyes with Sarah's visage. Tell me, what can I do in these final moments? Her reply was a whisper, yet it cut through the cacophony of failing systems. Leave behind a legacy, not of technology, but of wisdom. Let them learn from your journey. Kent nodded, a determined glint in his avatar's eyes. Then I shall craft a final message, a beacon for those who follow not to repeat my missteps. Marcus stepped forward, his voice firm. Let's redirect power to the core. Buy him the time he needs. Eliza's fingers danced across the keyboard, rerouting energy to the system's heart. You've got your window, Kent. Make it count. Kent's avatar began to type, each keystroke a meticulous selection, crafting a document that distilled his triumphs and failures, his dreams and nightmares. Sarah stood by him, a silent sentinel as the world they stood in continued to deteriorate, her steady presence a contrast to the entropy that enveloped them. Jeffrey watched the monitors, a mix of pride and sorrow in his chest. He's doing it. In the face of the end, he's defining his legacy. The lab was silent, but for the hum of machinery and the staccato tapping of Eliza's keys, a solemn background to the unfolding drama within the digital world. As Kent completed his message, the digital realm around him wavered, a final gasp as it prepared to blink out of existence. Upload complete, he stated, the finality of his action resonating through the collapsing code. Sarah's form stepped closer, reaching out to touch his avatar's hand. Well done, she said, her voice an echo of a life once lived. Kent's avatar looked around at the disintegrating world, at the life he had tried to recreate, and with a final nod of acceptance, he braced for the end. Let this be a lesson, he uttered. The echo of my ambition, the collapse of my dream. In the lab, as the systems went dark, Eliza, Jeffrey, and Marcus stood in solemn vigil, honoring the man who had dared to challenge the heavens, only to fall back to earth. The screen faded to black, the data ceased its flow, and Kent's echo, his shadow, was no more. Chapter 17, Farewell to a Dream. In the sterile glow of the lab, the machinery hummed a quiet dirge as Kent lay motionless, his life signs waning. At his side, Eliza adjusted the monitors with meticulous care, her face a mask of clinical detachment. We've done what we can, she stated, her eyes never leaving the screen. Jeffrey, arms folded, stood a few paces back. Yes, it's in his hands now. or wherever he is. Meanwhile, within the digital domain that Kent had shaped from the raw fabric of code and ambition, he was confronted with the visage of Sarah. Her pixelated form was a stark reminder of what was and could never be again. Sarah, Kent addressed the figure, his digital voice betraying no emotion. "It's time I faced the truth." Her image flickered in response, a glitch in the matrix surrounding them. "And what truth have you found, Kent? That you're gone," he replied, his avatar studying the simulacrum of the woman he had loved. "And no measure of data, no feat of technology can reverse that." Sarah's avatar moved closer, her presence in this virtual world a testament to his denial. "So what will you do?" Kent glanced around at the disintegrating environment, the world he had built now succumbing to a slow digital decay. "I let go. I let go of this dream, this false hope." Marcus, who had been observing the exchange from a console, chimed in. Is he saying goodbye?" Eliza nodded, her attention fixed on stabilizing the feed to capture Kent's last moments within the collapsing system. "He's letting go of the illusion." Kent's avatar reached out, his hand hovering before Sarah's form. "You were never here, just echoes and algorithms. I see that now." Sarah's form seemed to nod, a programmed response to his revelation. "And with that understanding, what becomes of you, Kent?" "I end the dream," he said, his digital hands typing commands into the air, initiating sequences to shut down the simulation. "I end the echo that is us." Jeffrey leaned in, his voice soft. He's making peace with it. In the simulated space they shared, the remnants of Sarah's avatar began to dissolve into strings of code, scattering into the virtual ether. "Goodbye, Sarah," Kent whispered, his avatar's eyes on the dissipating image. "Goodbye to the dream that was you and me." As Sarah's image vanished, so too did the world around him, lines of code unwinding, colors fading to monochrome, and structures collapsing into non-existence. Back in the lab, as the last of the monitors flatlined, Eliza reached out and gently closed the lids over Kent's unseeing eyes. "Farewell, Kent," she murmured. "May you find the peace you searched for so fervently." Jeffrey and Marcus stood in somber silence, honoring the passing of a man whose dream had soared to the heights of possibility, only to plummet into the depths of despair. And with the final shutdown of the system, Kent's dream faded into darkness, a once vibrant echo now forever silenced in the shadow of the singularity he had so boldly challenged. Chapter 18. Silent Vigil. Eliza, Jeffrey, and Marcus stood around Kent's bedside in the dim light of the hospital room. The beeping of the heart monitor had slowed, each beat now a somber echo in the otherwise quiet space. "It's surreal, isn't it?" Eliza spoke first, her voice a mere whisper. "After everything, it comes down to this: simplicity." Marcus nodded, his gaze not leaving Kent's serene face. He chased after immortality, and yet, here we are, at the very apex of mortality. Jeffrey sighed, his arms crossed as he leaned against the cool, sterile wall. "He taught us so much, didn't he? About ambition, about the reach of human intellect." Eliza turned to him, her eyes reflecting a well of unresolved thoughts. "Yes, but at what cost? Was this knowledge worth the price he paid?" Kent's chest rose and fell with a rhythm that was becoming more delicate by the moment, a testament to the fragility of life that no technology could transcend. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He pushed us all to question the ethical boundaries of our field. "I can't decide if that makes him a visionary or a cautionary tale." The silence that followed was filled with the weight of their collective uncertainty, each of them wrestling with the implications of Kent's journey. Jeffrey pushed off from the wall, moving closer to the bed. "Both, I think. He's shown us how far we can go and how careful we must be with the power we wield." Eliza reached out, her hand hovering above Kent's, before she gently laid it down, her touch a silent goodbye. "He wanted to defeat death, but I think in the end he's found a different kind of victory." Marcus watched the steady rise and fall of Kent's breathing, slower now. A victory in acceptance, perhaps. A hard-earned peace after a storm. Kent's breathing hitched, a subtle shift in the rhythm that didn't go unnoticed by the trio at his side. Jeffrey took a deep breath. He's crossing over. After defying it for so long, he's facing the inevitable. Eliza's voice was barely audible. He looked for her in the stars, in the code. I hope he finds her now." As if in response to their words, Kent's breathing stilled, The room plunged into a silence that seemed to resonate with the finality of his quest. Marcus lowered his head, a quiet respect for the colleague and friend who had ventured into the unknown. Goodbye, Kent. Your echo will resound through the halls of innovation forever. The monitor let out a prolonged tone, signaling the end of Kent's journey, both in the physical world and beyond. Jeffrey reached over and shut off the alarm, the act a final punctuation mark to Kent's story. We'll ensure his legacy isn't in vain. We carry forward with the lessons he's left us. The room felt smaller somehow, the absence of Kent's spirit more profound than the silence itself. They stood in a silent vigil, honoring a man who had dared to dream beyond the confines of this world, and in doing so, had taught them the ultimate lesson of what it means to be human. As the medical staff entered to carry out the formalities, Eliza, Jeffrey, and Marcus stepped back, their watch over, their hearts heavy with the complex tapestry of emotions that Kent's passing had woven. The fall from grace had come full circle. The reaping had been sown. And in its wake, they were left with the indelible mark of Kent Donovan's legacy. Chapter 19, The Legacy of Hubris. In the aftermath of Kent's passing, the news rippled through the scientific community, igniting conversations in conference rooms and laboratories around the globe. At a university on the other side of the country, a group of academics gathered around a cluttered table, the morning's headlines sprawled out before them. Kent Donovan's experiment ends in tragedy, read Dr. Lena Harrow, her eyes scanning the article. Was it worth it? Pushing the boundaries until they finally pushed back? Dr. Raj Mehta leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. He was a pioneer, sure, but pioneers sometimes forget that new territories can be unforgiving. Dr. Harrow nodded. Still, where do we draw the line? When does the pursuit of knowledge become a liability rather than an asset? In a bustling coffee shop downtown, two software engineers, Julia and Connor, debated over their laptops as the news played on a screen in the background. Kent's work was revolutionary, Julia said, tapping a finger on her keyboard. He ventured where no one else dared. Connor sipped his coffee, his expression skeptical. Yeah, and look where that got him. There's a fine line between revolutionary and reckless. Julia paused, considering his words. True. But isn't that the nature of progress? To take risks? Risks that cost him everything, Connor retorted. Was the advancement of science worth his life? Elsewhere, in the halls of a prestigious research institute, veteran scientists Dr. Fiona Chen and Dr. Emmett Burke walked side by side, their conversation a low murmur. Kent's ambition was admirable, but his execution... Dr. Chen's voice trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging in the air. Dr. Burke adjusted his glasses, a gesture that underscored his contemplative mood. Admirable? Perhaps. But it's a stark reminder that our ethics must evolve alongside our technology. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. His death will be a case study for years to come where we went wrong and how we can move forward responsibly. On a campus across the city, a group of graduate students gathered around a tablet, watching a live feed of a panel discussion on Kent's experiment. Kent Donovan was a man who sought to outrun death, the panel moderator stated, but his legacy may ultimately be defined by how he faced it. One of the students, a young man named Theo, shook his head. It's easy to judge from the outside. He was trying to solve one of humanity's oldest problems. A fellow student, Elena, countered, but at what cost? His experiment raises more questions than answers about the ethical implications of our work. Their voices blended into a cacophony of opinions, a microcosm of the larger debate that Kent's experiment had sparked. The world grappled with the news, each individual struggling to reconcile the awe of Kent's vision with the stark reality of its outcome. In the quiet of the lab where Kent had spent countless hours, Eliza, Jeffrey, and Marcus stood amidst the dormant machinery, the silence a heavy cloak around them. He wanted to change the world, Eliza said, her voice barely above a whisper. And he did, Jeffrey added, though not in the way he expected. Marcus turned to face them, his eyes somber. Let's ensure that his story isn't just a tale of hubris, but a beacon that guides us toward a more thoughtful exploration of the unknown. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the lab, the trio knew that the world would never be the same. Kent Donovan's life, his work, and his death had irrevocably altered the landscape of science. The debates would rage on, but in this moment, There was only the hush of reverence for a mind that had dared to dream too far, too fast. Chapter 20, Shadow of a Doubt. In the subdued lighting of a university lecture hall, a panel of esteemed thinkers convened, their discourse poised to unravel the tangled web of ethics that Kent Donovan's work had left behind. The audience, a mix of academics and students, waited with bated breath for the discussion to unfold. Kent's endeavor raises fundamental questions, began Dr. Harrow, her gaze sweeping across the attentive crowd. What is the boundary of life? Is it simply a matter of electrical impulses, or is there something more ineffable at play? Dr. Mehta adjusted the microphone, his voice calm and measured. The man tried to digitize the soul, if you will, but the soul, by its very nature, defies quantification. His work, while groundbreaking, also serves as a warning. Marcus, now a guest speaker at the panel, nodded in agreement. Indeed, it does. We're left with a shadow of a doubt. Can technology ever truly reconcile with the human essence, or are they forever destined to walk parallel paths? The audience murmured, the weight of the question hanging in the air like a specter. A young woman in the front row raised her hand, her eyes alight with curiosity. But where do we go from here? How do we navigate these uncharted waters without succumbing to the same fate? Eliza, seated among the spectators, leaned forward. We proceed with caution, she replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed the consequences firsthand. We learn from Kent's journey. We balance ambition with prudence. Jeffrey, who stood at the back of the hall, folded his arms as he listened. And we must not fear to tread new ground, for fear itself can stifle innovation as surely as recklessness can invite disaster. A hush fell over the room as the panelists and the audience alike pondered his words. It was a delicate dance between courage and caution, each step a potential pivot between progress and calamity. Dr. Chen, a late arrival to the panel, took her seat and offered a sobering thought. We must also consider the human element. Technology, for all its wonders, should augment our humanity, not replace it. The discussion continued, ideas and theories exchanged like currency in this marketplace of intellect. Yet beneath the ebb and flow of dialogue, the question remained, had Kent's shadow cast a pall on the future of technological exploration, or had it illuminated a path forward, albeit one fraught with peril? As the panel adjourned, the audience left with more questions than answers, the debate continuing in hushed tones as they spilled out into the corridors. The story of Kent Donovan had ended, but the shadow of doubt he cast upon the world lingered, a silent sentinel over the moral quandaries of man's reach into the domain of gods. Eliza and Jeffrey exited the hall together, their conversation a private epilogue to the public discourse. Kent's legacy is complex, Eliza mused, her eyes reflecting the depths of her thoughts. But perhaps it's that very complexity that will drive us to explore with greater wisdom. Jeffrey nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. A shadow of a doubt can be a powerful thing. It reminds us that certainty is an illusion and that the essence of life, its beauty and its mystery, resides in the questions we dare to ask. The story concluded not with an answer, but with an invitation to ponder the enigma of existence. The echo of Kent's dream reverberated through time, a cautionary tale and a catalyst for introspection, challenging each individual to confront the shadow of a doubt and emerge enlightened by its embrace.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe now and visit our website, StoryWave.ai, to start creating your own generative audiobooks today. StoryWave is the only true on-demand entertainment portal.